Eternal Fort. Super Mario 64 does not really have like a proper Bowser Castle in it or anything that could really truly feel like his like real built lair aside from like random spaces. And what this was is that it would have been the real final level for the place, separate from Bowser's in the Sky, but like the last like true level of stars and such. And yeah, this would have been like the true final challenge for players playing the game, the ultimate big level. And yeah, Peach's Castle takes place throughout the whole entire game, so this would have filled the role for Bowser's Castle in a sense. And this is believed to open up once you've proven that you know everything about Super Mario 64 and can do it all. This is the last Super Mario 64 level we're talking about in this century, which is why it's befitting of being the true final one. Seoul Temple. This is a temple that's recently been brought to my attention for Ocarina of Time, and for me, it has quickly become the most interesting one to look at and try to find stuff on. And see, this wasn't really a big rumor, however, recently with that medallion power leak I was talking about earlier on in the series, you saw that Seoul was on there as the Navi like movement control ability. And the most curious thing is that while Soul could possibly sound like that's like an early placeholder for Spirit, Spirit was on there alongside Soul separately. And Light was there too, so Soul can't somehow be Light. Implying that yes, this was its own separate dungeon, and maybe it's still out there in the game somehow, just waiting to be found by somebody, and is one of the true temples to test your skill on before Rainbow, and potentially before the next temple we'll be talking about a bit later on in this video. If you include the rumored temples, every area in Ocarina of Time has its own temple connected to it. But not Lon Lon Ranch. This is more so just like joking speculation, but I mean, maybe it could have been there, like Malin sings and you learn Epona's song there, and there's some phrase like music curing the soul or something, so, you know, it could have been there. Hideout Helm Moon, or King K. Rool Moon. Once you get to King K. Rool's room in Hideout Helm in Donkey Kong 64, you can look out of his computer monitors, and then there's just like typical stuff you expect, like DKIO or radar and whatnot. But curiously enough, there's one unique monitor there that's not like the rest, and that's this eerie, realistic image of the moon. I'm pretty sure that it's the same moon that you see in skyboxes, like for Creepy Castle, but what's the deal with it here? Like, why does King K. Rool have this unique image on one of his monitors that's not like any of the others? And just like the way it looks on top of like what kind of like interpretations or theories that you could come up with, it starts becoming really unsettling and weird and like perplexing in an unsettling sense once you try to find out what the whole entire point of this is. Waterfall noises. Another curious observation, and this alludes to Mario 64, and if you go near a waterfall and listen really closely, you can hear what is like a metallic sound, just like very light tapping, faint on metal. I don't know what exactly this is, or how it popped up in the recording or whatever, or if it's separately part of the game, but it's in there and nobody really knows what it is, and is pretty freaking underground until just lately, but even then it's not really talked about. Dark Temple, the last secret temple of Ocarina of Time to talk about here. And yeah, like the medallion leak which Soul came from, Dark was there too. Shadow wasn't, meaning that you could say that this is also an early placeholder for Shadow. However, shadows aren't exactly the same as dark. I mean, a shadow is just like what happens when some light's like obstructed and physically blocked off from somewhere. Darkness is the full opposite of light. It's advanced darkness. It's the complete absence of light. It's polar opposite, as I just said. Like, it floats better than like light and dark than light and shadow do. I mean, like, yeah, maybe this was intended to be its own place. Maybe it is still out there too, like all of the other rumored temples, and it's somewhere deep within a Hyrule's labyrinth underground, forbidden from anyone else. If you thought the Shadow Temple was bad, this could possibly even be even worse. After all the medallion power for light was to be lighting up dark rooms, but if you go through Ocarina of Time, there's like never any reason to use that if you were to have said ability. Well, maybe this would have been the place for it. It probably would have been the darkest place, both literally and possibly even figuratively, in Ocarina of Time. The interconnections between each major N64 game. So I mainly only said major because that's where it's strongest, and I also just didn't want to include the shitty titles. However, if you want to, you could say that the interconnections exist within every N64 game in general. After all, people has always have the desire to complete their N64 collections in full, even if it includes games that they'll never want to play. I know that the console had worse titles as usual released for it. However, like, there's just something about it where people feel much more compelled to get every single game, even if it's just from, like, titles alone. Like, I mean, there's still several hundred. Why would you want to go for all of that, unless if you had some force gripping you to it? Yes, it's not just in the game, but the interconnections can be felt between us also, even if we don't exactly notice it, but it affects us greatly in this theory. So I've talked a lot about connections between games in the series, specifically Super Mario 64 and Ocarina of Time. Yes, Wet Dry World possibly has Beta Zelda 64 assets. And yes, Ocarina of Time has the L's real statue in it, but there's even more to it than that. I talked about people wanting Link in Super Mario 64. Why was that so much strongly felt for those two games specifically than any other game in their series that share consoles? You don't get that for any other game in their generations. It's probably because we felt the bonds between those two games so much more strongly that it just felt right to have Link exploring Mario 64 and possibly vice versa too. And going back to Ocarina of Time, the R-Wings from Star Fox are in that game. And just recently, here's Paper Mario's chance to shine on the series. There was that new speedrunning tactic found that helps you skip a chunk of the prologue by booting up Ocarina of Time first before Paper Mario 64. Yes, the ROM is left in N64 consoles a bit after turning it off, but that was fixed like pretty late on where it only lasts for a second, which was meant to be the intentions of Stop and Swap, which would have connected Banjo-Kazooie to Donkey Kong 64 in its sequels, and Banjo appears in Diddy Kong Racing already. I mean, like, it goes much deeper than this even. I haven't even talked about, like, Super Smash Brothers yet. And then there's just more general stuff. Like, have you ever noticed or encountered this instance where you're trying to play a game, but for some reason it just doesn't work? And, like, nervous that maybe there's something wrong with the console itself. You put in another game to see if that works too, and that game does work. And then you take that out and try the original game, and that game finally does just suddenly work too with no flaws. It's possibly from the interconnections between the games helping and assisting and boosting each other up. The N64 lineup to me just always felt much stronger as like a group or party or family to me than any other game console out there. There's just something about the connections between these games that's such a more tough force than all the other ones. Like, I mean, Smash Bros. Started here, as said again earlier, and then there's all those, like, crossover promo commercials. Like, there was no issue with having, like, Banjo and Mario together with Fruit by the Foot. It just felt right. Like, I could probably go much more further into this and give this entry its own video. In fact, a lot of the entries I talked about on this series should be getting their own videos, and I'm going to go over that more in a future update video. But for now, this is doing it for the chart. Stay tuned where I start talking about specific entries in the future more in depth, because there are interconnections between every major N64 game, and we have to go find out the truth